Good morning.
Good morning.
It's good to see you all here today. Thank you for choosing to spend a portion of your Sunday here at Westside. I certainly enjoy having an opportunity to share my thoughts with all of you, and I hope I can satisfy whatever expectations you may have for today's reflection. We all spend most of our lives creating and dealing with expectations. It's a very human thing to do, and we're good at it. We get a lot of practice. We constantly assess our current lives and anticipate possible futures. We plot and plan, weigh and measure, and then invest heavily in our predictions about what the future will bring. Harvard psychologist Daniel Gilbert believes this ability to create and hold long-range plans and expectations may be the single defining characteristic that separates us from all other creatures on this planet. Discoveries about the brain over the last century suggest that the expansion of our large prefrontal cortex over the last several 100,000 years of evolution is what has enabled this ability. There must be great survival value in this trait since it's developed to such an extreme degree. But from survival or not, it appears that much of our frustration and unhappiness stems from the disappointment we feel when our routine expectations are not met. For example, a Texas teacher was helping one of her kindergarten students put on his cowboy boots. He'd asked for help, and she could see why. Even with her pulling and him pushing, little Boots didn't want to fit his feet. By the time they got the second boot on, she worked up quite a sweat, so she almost cried when the little boy said, "Teacher, they're on the wrong feet." She looked, and sure enough they were. Well, it wasn't any easier pulling them off than it was getting them on, but she did manage to keep her cool as together they worked to get the boots back on, this time on the right feet. He then announced, "These aren't my boots." She bit her tongue and once more struggled to help him pull the ill-fitting boots off his little feet. No sooner had they gotten the boots off when he said, "They're my brother's boots. My mom made me wear them." Now she didn't know if she should laugh or cry, but she mustered up what grace and courage she had left to rustle the boots back on his feet again. Helping him to his coach, she asked, "Now, where are your mittens?" And he responded, "I stuffed them in the toes of my boots." She'll be eligible for parole in about 3 years. Buddhist philosophy tells us that life is misery, and the origin of suffering is our attachment to transient things. Not only the physical objects that surround us, but also ideas, and in a greater sense, all objects of our perception. Buddhist writings explain that the reasons for suffering are desire, passion, ardor, pursuit of wealth and prestige, striving for fame and popularity, and in short, craving and clinging. We cling to our possessions and crave those things we do not yet possess. Because the objects of our attachment are transient, their loss is inevitable, and thus suffering will necessarily follow. To me, this paints a pretty dark picture of human existence, but what does it mean in a practical sense to somebody who wants to achieve a more enlightened life? Must I give away all my worldly possessions in order to escape suffering? That always sounded to me like inviting a lot more misery than I was already experiencing. Well, fortunately, the way to enlightenment is recognized as a gradual path of self-improvement that can enable letting go of attachments and freeing ourselves from compulsion without necessarily living in a bear cave and subsisting on tree bark. I was quite happy to learn about this because my idea of roughing it is spending a weekend in a Class A recreational vehicle or at a Motel 6. I began to understand why both the Buddhist and the Hindu perceived as journeys that span multiple lifetimes. It's clearly going to take me that long to relinquish my attachment to central climate control and indoor plumbing. I believe it's important to keep in mind that there are individuals who are willing to help free their fellow humans from worldly burdens for reasons that are not completely selfless. I saw an ad just the other day that read, "Money isn't everything. It can buy a bed but not sleep. It can buy a clock but not time. It can buy you a book but not knowledge. It can buy you a position but not respect. It can buy you medicine but not health. And it can buy you blood but not life." So you see, money isn't everything, and it often causes pain and suffering. I tell you this because I am your friend, and as your friend, I want to take away your pain and suffering. So send me all your money, and I will suffer for you. This does not sound like a spiritual leader I was seeking to follow, though it does sound like a couple of televangelists I heard speak recently. Certainly there's more to life than just plain happiness, but I believe the avoidance of abject misery is a worthy objective in itself, and if some joy can be derived from our daily routine, we should certainly embrace it. In the early 1970s, I made the acquaintance of a remarkably impressive fellow named Frank Gerbode. Now, Frank was one of those people who never seemed to stay still. He didn't just move from place to place, he bounced. Just walking with him was an exercise in personal stamina. When I asked him where he got his boundless energy, he replied, "From the physical universe, man, it's free." And it wasn't just physical energy that Frank exhibited. He was intellectually voracious and thoroughly dedicated to the study of the human mind. I looked up his Wikipedia entry recently, and it reads in part, "He is an honors graduate of Stanford University. He later pursued graduate studies in philosophy at Cambridge University. He received his medical degree from Yale University and completed a psychiatric residency at Stanford University Medical Center in the early 1970s. At the time I met him, I was in my early 20s, and I gave serious consideration to anything Frank said. He once tossed off a comment that I puzzled over for some years. He said, "Many things in life are important, but almost none of them are serious." I subsequently classified this statement as alternately very profound and completely silly. But it stuck in my mind. Could something be simultaneously important and yet not serious? Well, the whole idea struck me as kind of Zen-like. I finally decided it might be possible if you define the importance of something as directly related to how many other things are affected by it or dependent on it, while the seriousness is defined as the amount of personal attachment we feel toward it. Compulsive level of attachment? Very serious. Emotionally detached or unconcerned? Not serious at all. Now, as convoluted as this might sound, there may be considerable value in working on important issues with an attitude that is less than completely serious. I notice people who exhibit a lighthearted approach to important work almost always exhibit a higher state of energy and a little more mental agility when dealing with problems. They also seem to be able to attract others to their cause rather than scare away or intimidate potential allies. It seems there's nothing like the ponderous weight of the deadly serious to warn people away from participation. So consider the following, which is adapted from an original work by Don Harrod. If I had my life to live over, I would dare to make more mistakes next time. I would relax, liver up. I would be sillier than I've been this trip. I would take fewer things seriously and take more chances. I would climb more mountains, swim more rivers, and watch more sunsets. I would perhaps perhaps have more actual troubles, but I would have fewer imaginary ones. I've been one of those people who never goes anywhere without a thermometer, a hot water bottle, a raincoat, and a parachute. If I had it to do over, I would travel lighter on the next trip. I would start going barefoot earlier in the spring and stay that way later in the fall. I would have more sweethearts. I would go to more dances. I would sing more songs and play more games. I would ride more merry-go-rounds. I'd pick more daisies. Living in the moment always sounds very liberating, but I believe it's far more difficult to achieve than we might wish. When surveyed, most people freely admit they identify strongly with their profession. Especially in the United States, there's this perception you are what you do for a living. While it's important to derive some satisfaction from a job well done, and even a level of pride, thinking that the end-all and be-all of your existence is exclusively what you do to earn money makes you very vulnerable to the whims of the job market. As many of us here heard from Rick Hansen a few weeks ago, anyone who's ever been fired or laid off from a job can tell you, if they're willing to talk about it, what a terrible blow to the ego it can be. This concept of being your job is one expectation that threatens great damage to your self-esteem. Failure to get an expected promotion, unanticipated downsizing, finding yourself in a dead-end career path, or even entering into retirement, can have a devastating effect on your emotional health and cause you real misery. This is one attachment we might all want to consider diminishing. So what am I, if not a carpenter, teacher, lawyer, truck driver? Only you can answer that. But I suggest you begin by deciding what in life you consider most important. And if you need any help considering your job is less important, remember a cigarette shortened your life by 2 minutes. A beer shortened your life by 4 minutes. A working day shortened your life by 8 hours. Well, short of completely withdrawing from modern civilization and living in a cave, I keep looking for that middle ground that offers some joy and at least a partial escape from misery. Well, this could be characterized as a lack of commitment. Perhaps we needn't go all in order to reduce our suffering. Examining our expectations seems to me a reasonable place to start. A friend of mine recently mentioned that his wife sometimes experiences what can only be described as the occasional mood swing. Since he's not always as perceptive about these things as he might be, he bought her a mood ring with the expectation that it might enable him to be more aware and sensitive to her emotional state. He says it's working after a fashion. See, when she's happy, it turns a beautiful bright blue color. And when she's unhappy, it leaves a small red dent in his forehead. Like my friend, part of the reason we form and hold so tightly to expectations is that it's more comforting to think about the future as somewhat predictable and stable. Now, realistically, no amount of planning or forming unreasonable expectations will actually reduce uncertainty. It does seem to increase the likelihood of disappointment when life hands you the unexpected. So, what's a person to do? Well, maybe start with our expectations for other people. You know, we all have them, and we're quite familiar with being disappointed when they don't live up to the high standards we've set for them. Now, this isn't easy, but it's something I've been trying. And that's to acknowledge that other people are free agents, operating on their own perceptions and according to their own motivations. Their decisions and actions won't be the same as mine. You see, I'm hoping to find more peace by being a mildly interested observer of others than by acting like a horse racing fan rooting for my entry across the finish line first. Now, this is even more difficult when we're talking about our children, because we all have hopes and aspirations for them. I know my parents thought I was cut out to be some kind of genius, but to their great disappointment, I didn't quite manage to put all those pieces together. Should you manage to achieve some measure of success in diminishing your expectations for others, you might then try identifying a few unreasonable expectations you're holding for yourself. Now, I don't mean to suggest you should dramatically lower your standards, although I suppose that's always an option, but just consider telling that self-critical voice we all seem to carry to give it a rest for a while. This is the silence you can rightfully call golden. I mentioned before a number of benefits associated with meditation, and to me, a quiet mind is one of the most valuable. In fact, were that the only result of meditation, I think it was well worth the effort. So I'm going to leave you with just one more brief story. An old Cherokee told his grandson, "My son, there's a great battle between two wolves inside us all. One is evil. It is anger, jealousy, greed, resentment, inferiority, lies, and ego. The other is good. It is joy, peace, love, hope, humility, kindness, empathy, and truth." The boy thought about this for a few minutes and then asked his grandfather, "Which wolf wins?" The old Cherokee quietly replied, "The one you feed." As we rise in body or spirit and join together in singing our closing hymn, number 86, "Blessed Spirit of My Life."